now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. There is a lot of news to share and decode for you from Rome this week. To do so, we're joined by phone by the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, author of The Rigging of a Vatican Synod, Edward Pentin. Ed, thanks for being here. You reported this week on a piece by Father Antonio Spadaro. Now, this Jesuit priest is an intimate of the Pope, a confidant, ghostwriter, a regular defender of Pope Francis. In fact, he and the Pope were often seen together, entering and exiting the Synod a few weeks ago, which makes Father Spadaro's column in the Jesuit magazine he edits, La Civiltà Cattolica, all the more interesting. This week, he wrote that sections 84 to 86 of the final Synod document laid the groundwork for civilly remarried divorcees to receive communion. To give you a fuller background, here are excerpts of the paragraphs Spadaro cites. We'll put it up on full screen. While upholding the general norm, it's necessary to recognize that the responsibility of certain actions or decisions is not the same in all cases. Pastoral discernment, taking into account of the correct formed consciences of people, must take up these situations. Going on, it says, the path of accompaniment and discernment orients these faithful to an awareness of conscience of their situation before God. Conversation with the priest in the internal forum, confession, contributes to the formation of a correct judgment on what places an obstacle to the possibility of a fuller participation in the life of the Church. Edward Pentin, first of all, why is Spadaro's word so important here, his column? Even though many Synod Fathers have stressed that the final document in no way opens a door to sacraments for the divorced and remarried.
Well, it's really, as you said earlier, Raymond, that he is a very close sort of confidant of the Pope. He's a Jesuit, as we know, and he's often advising the Pope on sort of media matters, as well as other things. And to have him say this, some people think because of his closeness to the Pope, he's basically sort of being a spokesman for the Pope and putting out the Pope's ideas. And what's controversial about this is that he's saying, you know, that the Synod actually opened a door to communion for divorced and remarried, and that it's laid the foundations for such an innovation. And that, of course, as viewers will know, is very problematic because that's been obviously opposed by many people, and it's for good reason. And so by saying this, somebody said the Pope is probably sort of he's sort of throwing ideas up a flagpole to see who salutes. He's sort of flying a kite and seeing who is going to sort of say this is right and who's going to oppose it. And from that, he'll decide what to put in his final report.
Wow. Father Spadaro also quotes Cardinal Schönborn, Christoph Schönborn, to build his argument that the sacraments are being offered or could be offered to divorced and remarried Catholics. This is a quote from his column. Cardinal Schönborn, interviewed by our magazine before the Synod, had affirmed that there are situations in which the priest confessor who knows the persons in the internal forum can come to the point of saying, quote, your situation is such that in conscience, in your and my conscience as a pastor, I see your place in the sacramental life of the Church. Concerning access to the sacraments, Spadaro goes on, the ordinary Synod has therefore effectively laid the foundations, opening a door that at the previous Synod had instead remained closed. On the contrary, 1 year ago, it had not even been possible to certify by qualified majority the debate on the issue, which had in fact taken place. Therefore, one may rightly speak of a new step. Edward Pentin, what's been the reaction to this in Rome?
Well, I mean, it's obviously caused quite a stir for the reasons I just said, but also it's important to remember that, as Father Spadaro said, the Pope, this was rejected at the last Synod. It's important to remember that it didn't get a qualified majority, this issue. And as Father Spadaro said, it was closed at the last Synod, but now it's opened because the Pope wanted to carry it over to this Synod and keep the debate alive, even though it was essentially rejected by the Synod Fathers. So that's obviously causing problems. And also just to remember also that Father Spadaro is editor of La Civiltà Cattolica, which has always been a very influential Jesuit magazine. And it's influential because it always has had to get the sort of imprimatur of the Secretariat of State, not only the Secretariat of State now, but also the Pope himself. So that's also what's giving us extra weight.
I see.
But as I said earlier, I think it's basically flying a kite and seeing just who's opposing it and who's not.
It's a trial balloon then.
But I think there will be quite a bit of pushback.
We're talking about a trial balloon then, right?
Yes, basically, yes. That's what it seems to be. And also connected with other comments the Pope has made since the Synod, which have kind of pushed us along, this sort of reform agenda.
I want to get into some of those comments. Father Spadaro was quite clear in quoting the Pope in his column, and he quotes the Pope to undergird his argument. This is one of the quotes in his column. "The Church should be one that questions herself with regard to her fidelity to the deposit of faith, which does not represent for the Church a museum to view, nor even something merely to safeguard, but is a living source from which the Church shall drink to satisfy the thirst of and illuminate the deposit of life." And then he quotes this from a daily Mass homily in October. The Pope says, "Times are changing, and we Christians must change continually. We must change whilst remaining fixed to our faith in Jesus Christ, fixed to the truth of the gospel, but we must adapt our attitude continuously, according to the signs of the times." Now, Edward, as you said, nothing is published in this Jesuit magazine without the Holy See Secretariat of State screening it. Is the Pope steadily preparing the Church for change in the year of mercy on this issue?
Well, that seems to be the consensus, that he certainly wants to push this. But again, it all depends on whether he can get it through without too much opposition. I think he wants to do it with, obviously, the majority support of bishops. But if there is a big outcry, then I don't think he will. But it's very much this. It's been like this, as we know, for 2 years. We don't know really what the Pope really wants. We can only speculate. But there is this sense in Rome, I think, among a lot of people that, it's getting to the point where they've had enough of this sort of cat and mouse game, and they want to know what the Pope really thinks.
Where the Pope stands.
So the sooner this apostolic exaltation comes, the better, yeah.
Yesterday, the Vatican, moving on to something slightly different, the Vatican announced that 2 journalists are facing criminal investigations because they published books on Catholic Church scandals based on leaked documents. What is going on here, Edward Pentin? And as a journalist, one who has also reported and uncovered at times uncomfortable things and happenings in the Church, are you concerned about journalists being investigated for reporting what third-party sources are giving them?
Well, this is a bit of a concern, that's true. And the way the Vatican has sort of come down on the journalists, as well as those 2 who are arrested, has caused quite a bit of concern, because none of them have been tried, but they're being tried by public opinion, if you like. They're being put out there by the Vatican. The names are being broadcast, and they're basically being sort of, some would say, being very much, tried before a proper trial. They're sort of guilty before being proven innocent, and that's concern to people. But it does show the depths to which the Pope is really trying to reform these things, and how concerned he is about reforming the Vatican finances, and that anything that gets in the way of that, or is perceived to get in the way of that, he's wanting to sort of come down hard on. So there is that, and people I've spoken to who are really pushing this reform and important to it, they didn't like this either, and they thought the journalists were basically whipping up old stories which have been kind of addressed already, and probably for whatever motives we don't know, but they say it's not helping the reform process.
I don't have any problem with any institution, well, the White House, Congress, or the Vatican, or the UN, or anybody, trying to close down leaks. But to do that, you lean on your own people in your organization. You don't target journalists. And I worry a bit when we hear Sandro Magister, who was sort of, cast into the outer darkness for releasing the encyclical, Laudato Si, before publication date, but he was given that by a third party. I don't see how that's foul in journalistic terms.
No, well, this is a very good point, Raymond, and also there seems to be a double standard at work here, because you've got the letter of the 13 cardinals, of course, which was leaked. It was a private letter. It was leaked to Andrea Tornielli, who is very close to the Pope. In fact, he's got a book coming out, a book interview with the Pope coming out in January. But there's been no repercussions. There hasn't been any reprimand for that. In fact, there's been no investigation. I've asked Father Lombardi twice if he could confirm whether there's been some investigation into that leak, but I've heard no answer. So, it seems to be a sort of, if the leak is not favoured, then they come down hard on it. But if it seems to be in the Pope's interests, then it's all fine and okay. So I think there's a problem there, which I think weakens and undermines the Pope's authority and his willingness to sort of come to terms with these leaks. I think that sort of needs to be addressed.
Interesting point. Final question. In response to the Vatileaks scandal, Pope Francis gave a talk to the Italian Bishops' Conference this week. He suggested that the Church had to stop clinging to conservatism and fundamentalism as a defensive response to problems it faces. He said the Church ought to be bruised, hurting, and dirty instead of obsessed with money and power. I'll read you this quote quickly, and then I want your reaction. Quote, "Before the problems of the Church, it is not useful to search for solutions in conservatism or fundamentalism, in the restoration of obsolete conduct and forms that no longer have the capacity of being significant culturally. Christian doctrine is not a closed system incapable of generating questions, doubts, interrogatives. But it is alive, knows being unsettled. It does not have a rigid face. It has a body that moves and grows. It has a soft flesh. It is called Jesus Christ." What is the Pope trying to say here, Edward Pentin?
It is. I mean, I think it's first of all important to look at the context. He is talking to the Italian Church, and the Italian Church has a history of being very sort of established and very close to the power, channels of power and money as well. And I think that's part of it. But at the same time, it does give an insight into how the Pope is trying to sort of push this reform agenda through the Church. And we've heard this before, he thinks the sort of conservatism, or rather what he calls rigidity to doctrine, is a problem, and he sees that as an obstacle to reform. But critics, will say, well, you've got to have doctrine as the basis of any reform, and any reform should in fact deepen and help come to a better understanding of doctrine. So there is this problem here with what he's trying to put across, and I don't think many people are on board, or many people are on board, but many people also aren't, and I think that's problematic going forward. But again, it just gives a better insight into what the Pope's vision is, and also what he might put in his post-synodal apostolic exhortation. I think it's going to be fairly similar, or at least he's going to be trying to put in similar things to what he said to the Italian Church.
Very good. Edward Pentin, the Year of Mercy is just weeks away. We'll see how far that extends, and we'll check in with you as it develops. Edward is the author of The Rigging of a Vatican Synod. That ebook is available online at ignatius.com, amazon.com, and elsewhere. All his reports are at the National Catholic Register. Edward, thanks for being here.